The year was 1936. America was grappling with the Great Depression. In the South, a struggle for basic human rights raged. A legal case emerged from Mississippi, shaking the nation's conscience. Brown versus Mississippi. Three black men, Ed Brown, Henry Shields, and Arthur Ellington. Sharecroppers falsely accused, victims of unimaginable cruelty.
They whipped me and said, "You going to confess, nigger?" I said, "I ain't going to confess to something I ain't done."
Brown v. Mississippi stands as a landmark case, a stark reminder of the fragility of justice. Mississippi in the 1930s was a place poisoned by racism. Jim Crow laws reigned supreme, enforcing segregation and discrimination. Black Americans were denied basic rights, treated as second-class citizens in their own land. Lynchings, often carried out with impunity, cast a long shadow of terror over black communities. The law enforcement system was often an instrument of oppression, and white supremacy permeated police departments. Black citizens had little hope of fair treatment. Their voices were silenced, their lives deemed disposable. It was in this climate of fear and injustice that the tragic events of Brownville, Mississippi unfolded. The murder of Raymond Stewart, a white farmer, became the catalyst for this landmark case. Stewart's death was a horrific crime, and the demand for justice was swift and fierce. However, the investigation quickly morphed into a witch hunt, fueled by racial prejudice and a thirst for vengeance. The authorities, under immense pressure to find the culprits, targeted the most vulnerable: Ed Brown, Henry Shields, and Arthur Ellington. The accusations against the three men were flimsy at best. No physical evidence linked them to the crime scene, yet their race and their position in society made them easy targets. The sheriff and his deputies, driven by a racist ideology and a desire to close the case quickly, resorted to unspeakable brutality to extract confessions. Brown, Shields, and Ellington were arrested and taken to the local jail. What followed was a horrifying ordeal. The men were subjected to days of relentless torture. They were stripped naked, hung from trees, and whipped mercilessly. Their screams for mercy went unanswered, drowned out by the sickening thud of flesh against wood.
They whipped me and they said, "You going to confess, nigger?" And I said, "I ain't going to confess to something I ain't done."
These chilling words, spoken by Ed Brown, revealed the depths of their suffering. Despite the unimaginable pain, the men refused to confess to a crime they did not commit. Their resilience in the face of such brutality is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. The relentless torture finally broke the men's spirits. They confessed to the murder, but their confessions were born out of terror, not truth. These forced confessions, coerced through unimaginable pain and fear, became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. The sheriff and his deputies, emboldened by their success in obtaining confessions, ignored the obvious signs of torture. The men's bodies were covered in welts and lacerations, their spirits crushed. Yet the authorities presented these coerced confessions as evidence of guilt, confident that their actions would go unpunished. The case went to trial in the town of Kemper County, Mississippi. The courtroom, typically a place of justice, became another stage for this racially charged spectacle. The all-white jury, steeped in the prejudices of the Jim Crow South, seemed incapable of delivering a fair verdict. The defense attorneys, lacking resources and facing a hostile environment, struggled to mount an effective defense. Section 5, a trial of lies. The trial itself was a sham, a mockery of justice. The coerced confessions, the only evidence presented against the defendants, were allowed into court. The defense's attempts to highlight the brutality endured by the accused fell on deaf ears. The judge, bound by the racist norms of the time, turned a blind eye to the blatant injustice unfolding before him. The jury, swayed by the prosecution's narrative and influenced by the pervasive racial bias of the time, reached a guilty verdict after a mere 2 hours of deliberation. The defendants, despite their claims of innocence and the lack of credible evidence, were sentenced to death. The courtroom, meant to be a sanctuary of fairness, had become a tool of oppression. The verdict sent shockwaves through the African-American community. The case became a rallying cry for civil rights activists across the nation. The NAACP, sensing the magnitude of the injustice, took up the case, determined to fight this egregious miscarriage of justice all the way to the Supreme Court. Section 6, the 14th Amendment betrayed. The Brown v. Mississippi case presented a crucial test for the United States Constitution, specifically the 14th Amendment. This amendment, adopted in 1868, was designed to ensure equal protection under the law for all citizens, regardless of race. It guaranteed due process of law, a fundamental principle of American jurisprudence. The 14th Amendment, ratified in the aftermath of the Civil War, represented a promise to the newly freed slaves. It was a promise of equality, of fairness, of protection from the tyranny that had defined their lives for generations. Yet, in the hands of racist officials and apathetic courts, this promise was often broken. The Brown versus Mississippi case laid bare the tragic reality. The 14th Amendment's noble aspirations were often ignored in practice. The defendants, denied basic due process, became victims of a system that valued racial hierarchy over justice. Their case exposed the deep chasm between the Constitution's ideals and the harsh realities faced by Black Americans in the Jim Crow South. Section 7. A nation's conscience stirred. News of the case spread beyond Mississippi, igniting outrage across the nation. Newspapers, both North and South, published editorials condemning the brutality and injustice inflicted upon the three men. Civil rights organizations rallied to their defense, recognizing the case's potential to challenge the very foundations of racial discrimination in the justice system. Legal scholars, troubled by the blatant disregard for due process, added their voices to the growing chorus of dissent. They argued that the use of torture to extract confessions violated fundamental principles of American law. The case became a lightning rod, forcing the nation to confront the uncomfortable reality of racial terror and its corrosive effect on the justice system. The case also revealed the deep divisions within American society. While many condemned the treatment of the accused, others defended the actions of the Mississippi authorities. They argued that maintaining order and upholding white supremacy justified any means necessary, even if it meant sacrificing the principles of justice. Section 8. The Supreme Court speaks. The Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, agreed to hear the case. The justices, faced with the gruesome details of the case and the blatant disregard for due process, delivered a unanimous verdict. They overturned the convictions of Brown, Shields, and Ellington. Chief Justice Charles Hughes, writing for the court, minced no words in his condemnation of the state of Mississippi. The rack and torture chamber may not be substituted for the witness stand, he wrote. His words resonated with the power of moral clarity, affirming that the use of torture to extract confessions was unconscionable and a betrayal of the Constitution. The Supreme Court's unanimous decision in Brown v. Mississippi marked a turning point in the fight for justice. The Supreme Court's decision sent a powerful message. The Constitution, with its guarantees of due process and equal protection, applied to all citizens, regardless of race. It affirmed that the brutal methods employed by the Mississippi authorities were an affront to the very foundation of American justice. Section 9. Justice prevails, but at a cost. The Supreme Court's ruling in Brown v. Mississippi was a watershed moment in the fight for racial justice. It established a crucial precedent, making it clear that coerced confessions were inadmissible in court. The decision served as a powerful rebuke to the Jim Crow South. However, the victory was not without its costs. The three men endured years of imprisonment for a crime they did not commit. Their lives were irrevocably scarred by the ordeal. Section 10. The legacy of Brown v. Mississippi. Brown v. Mississippi stands as a landmark case, a beacon illuminating the ongoing struggle for racial justice in America. It exposed the fragility of the justice system, revealing how easily it could be manipulated. The case forced the nation to confront the brutal realities of racial terror. The Supreme Court's unanimous condemnation demonstrated its commitment to upholding the Constitution. The legacy of Brown v. Mississippi extends far beyond the courtroom. Section 11. Continuing the fight for justice. Decades have passed since the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Brown v. Mississippi, yet the struggle for racial justice in the American criminal justice system continues. While the overt brutality of the Jim Crow era may have faded, it has been replaced by more subtle yet equally insidious forms of discrimination. Racial disparities persist at every stage of the criminal justice system, from arrest rates to sentencing guidelines. Mass incarceration fueled by the war on drugs and discriminatory policing practices has devastated communities of color. The echoes of Brown v. Mississippi can be heard in the cries for justice that continue to ring out across the nation. The fight continues, demanding justice, equality, and an end to systemic racism. The lessons of Brown v. Mississippi must not be forgotten. They serve as a powerful reminder that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing process, requiring constant vigilance and a willingness to challenge the status quo. The fight for equal justice under the law is a fight that each generation must take up, striving to create a future where the horrors of the past are never repeated.